Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where we look at every classic Doctor Who story plus a bunch of big finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. Now, before we begin, I just want to make sure everybody knows, because in 2019, YouTube was caught data mining the information of underage users, therefore violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, aka COPPA. In this violation, they reached a settlement with the U.S. government, which essentially scapegoats creators, meaning that I have to say that this video is not intended for children. It is not marketed at kids. It is not advertised to kids. Yes, Doctor Who is a show that children can watch. However, this video, as with all the videos on my channel, are looking at the show from an adult perspective, and as such, this is, maybe discussing adult themes. Viewer discretion is advised. That being said, it currently is the 11th. The 11th of July 2020. I just finished listening to part 1 of The Lady of Mercia, the second installment in the penultimate Older Nyssa trilogy, and the ones where there is something very, very different, from Paul Magrs. This is, there's quite, there is something very, very important about basically this entire story, and that is that it is kind of doing the Time Warrior thing, where the story starts off, and then we jump back in time near the end of part 1. Like, Nyssa is transported back, Tegan is transported back in time, and that is the, that's where the story starts. The whole idea is that there's this Lady of Mercia who is a character in English sort of mythology from, like, the 10th century or so, who might have been in charge of, like, the entire, basically, the entire, British Empire, under, Queen Ethelfrid and Prince, and the king, and it's definitely, it starts out interesting, because there's this whole museum, plot, where, you have this Dr. Stone, who is, working on a time machine, which Tegan accidentally gets getting up because she's been investigating, like, at this conference where we're basically, there's the history department is being cut. She's created essentially time travel. This Professor John Bleak, played by Anthony Howell, who's been in a couple of Doctor Who stuff before. I think I don't know if he's been in stuff that he's not actually in anything that we have covered here, but he's known for being in I think the Avengers adaptations. which is really, really cool. But yeah, basically looking at this sword from the Lady of Mercia, and Tegan basically just follows him out, and she gets stuck back in time while the Doctor, Nyssa, and Turlough are in the present. Now, that's actually a pretty simple premise for an episode. It really is. It's easy. It's something that you kind of expect from Doctor Who. It's a good, fun premise. And Paul Magrs is an author to make it work really, really well. It doesn't feel... Yes, I noticed similarities to the Time Warrior, but not as much like the history, just in the present character being sent back in time, which is kind of a simple thing, but it does enough differently. Like, you instead of having an actual mystery about it, it's just an experiment gone wrong. The rest of the story is just done as like, oh, here's a history conference. Here are our characters. So something that I think that this is one of those different little bits of side story where you see stuff like that. This is one of those there is something different here for the characters. It's fun, and seeing Tegan basically have to BS her way through being historical is funny. It's really funny, and the Doctor is hilarious right at his home here. There is something different about that, and I really do love it. It's one of those great things. It's just a great, enjoyable sort of romp that has the potential to be amazing. It's got some problems. It's a bit clunky, and it's kind of dragged a little bit in places, but overall, it started off the story nicely. Paul Magrs has a script. It's definitely well, this was released before the Peterloo Massacre. The previous Magrs story I experienced in this marathon, and just in general, was the Peterloo Massacre. This is much more laid back than Peterloo. Yeah, there's some danger near the end, and I'm sure there's gonna be danger going forward. But it's not doing a tragedy. It's doing something fun, and something different. And I genuinely can respect Magrs for that. So overall, I'm gonna have to give Part 1 of The Lady of Mercia an 8 out of 10. Okay, it is the 11th of July 2020, and I just finished listening to Part 2 of The Lady of Mercia, which I actually think is better than the first part. Yeah, it really does improve, at least on a couple of flaws, and the fact that the first one wasn't as perhaps tightly paced as it should be. Now, that might be because the second one is actually only about 24 minutes in length, so it's shorter. There's it is a shorter second episode, which is fine. Is especially fine. Like, you can have a shorter episode, especially with Big Finish. I'm very much a proponent of giving your story as much time as it needs to be told. It's definitely one of those things, one of the stories where you where you have that. But Paul Mars actually makes the script very, very much, well, two fish out of water. Early on in the second episode, Princess Elfwin, I really hope I'm saying that right. They're credited with the sort of A, I think it's the thorn? The A, the E that's connected. It's, yeah, it's, no, it's the ash. Or, yeah, it's the ash. The thorn is the Y, which is TH. Which I think is actually quite funny, but I'm not here to talk about language. But yeah, because they are, older characters from a very old time, and a time that is in the past and things. But Elfwin is brought to a, it is is brought to the present, and she just goes on a rampage, which is hilarious. Like, yes, you feel really bad for her because she has no idea what's going on, as she is genuinely scared and lashes out because of said fear, which becomes a really 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 solid little thing, for the plot, is that it is this big thing. Like, she attacks Turlough and calls him a Dane and threatens to kill him off, but he calls himself a devil. Mark's fiction actually gets a lot of comedy here, and yeah, this episode is a lot more comedic, though it isn't in the traditional Paul Mars comedy style where it's over the top comedy, but it's more of, it's more of just a subtler comedy with playing more around with the characters and the things, which I think is really really solid. I do like the characterization of the comedy here, because you have the professor. You have Professor Bleak, who is a complete coward, so he gets locked up, and Tegan and Queen Ethelfrid actually get a lot of really nice scenes together in this episode. Tegan is honest with her, tells the truth, and yes, Tegan attempts to put it into language so that this ancient queen will understand. This ancient queen will understand what she means, but it still comes across, and Ethelfrid isn't an unintelligent woman, and she has her own plight. She and it's really is something that the story does well, with this very very different story, and there is, like, she has her plight. She needs to be seen as a strong queen, and able to make her enemies not fear her, but not fear her, but respect her, and it's something that I think is just portrayed really really well. It's really solid as as you get the feeling that, yeah, this isn't, you know, this isn't, the normal thing. And she asks Tegan a favor. The cliffhanger's a bit weak. Cliffhanger's kind of a bit weak, but that's really my only complaint here, as this has just been a really, really solid story so far. With Marsh, you kind of know what you're getting into. It's gonna be good. Of course, it's gonna be good. But it's not the entire thing that the story has. It has a lot going for it. It's just nice, fun. It's close to a pure historical, but there is small sci-fi elements, sci-fi elements that make the story, that switch things up. But overall, it's a solid episode. I'm going to give part 2 of The Lady of Mercia a 9 out of 10. Okay, it is the 13th. Yeah, 13th of July, 2020. I just finished listening to part 3 of The Lady of Mercia. And I have thoughts. I have actually a lot of thoughts. Not entirely amazing thoughts. It's not, one of the best episodes ever. I will say, it's a Paul Magrs script. There are very few. Paul Magrs is one of those authors whom I like a lot. He has this way of just really making it easy. There is there's just something amazing about it. I mean, this is the one. This is the episode where I think the biggest fault is that instead of just doing something cool and amazing, the Doctor is just like, okay, I'm gonna bring her back in the TARDIS. I kind of wish we had a bit more fish out of waterness with with the princess, just because her being a fish out of water has been it is where a lot of the story, really was really nice. Princess Elfwin filling that role, and it's an important role, and something that's important to note, because it's a character who is out of water. I mean, yes, they go back, and when they go back, Mars does do a great job with what he's sort of trying to do. And what he's trying to do is kind of show history very much in the way that, say, the Time Meddler did, where history wasn't the nicest. It was dark. There's a lot of murder, and you have Queen Ethelfred's brother meeting her in the end, with Tegan and going to kill her, and Tegan putting up with the ruse to be the princess is it's actually really well acted. I love Janet Fielding in this episode. She is brilliant, and just sort of oozes this personality of who she is. She creates this act for herself and for like just for the princess to be this, this character, and it's something that I think Mars understands really, really well, specifically about this TARDIS team. It's Mars at his best, doing a team he clearly loves, and that shines throughout the story. It's not this whole new thing. It's a very much a here's a story we're telling. Here are a bunch of interesting ideas about said story that we want to tell. So that's where we're going with it, and I love just the way it's done throughout the episode. It is definitely something different and something sort of where you have just this interesting sort of ability to tell this type of a story. Again, it's not a perfect episode. It isn't. It does bring everything back to the past too quickly, though. Trying to explain time travel to both people from the past and people from the what isn't present, but from 1983. Because Mars sets this as if it was a season 20 adventure set in the what would be the quote unquote present, because it would be the present if this was a televised story. And he kind of does make it possible to be a televised story. You could imagine all the costumes, and that's sort of half the fun. But still something just that is really, really taken care of, and there's just this good little bit of care dropped in for what Mars wants to do with this story. So overall, I'm going to give part 3 of The Lady of Mercia a 9 out of 10. Okay, it's the 14th of July 2020. I just finished listening to part 4 of The Lady of Mercia, aka the final episode and the bookend. And it is satisfying. It is quite interesting that the bookends for this story are the weaker aspects. Like, parts 2 and 3 are brilliant and great and amazing, but parts 1 and 4 are just oddly so odd when it comes to like how they are like, okay, here's the bookends we're doing, here's what sort of plot we're playing with. Let's just get that out there and do it. There's a lot of stuff takes place in the past, and then there's a really, really long conclusion. And I don't mean like resolution, I mean conclusion, like after the main resolution is done and dead, like that, where everyone has to get back to the present, into the TARDIS and leave. Like that's where we have to go, because this is Doctor Who. And while there are some really, really fun bits of that resolution, I love the idea of Tegan being forced into a nunnery, because that's just such an opposite thing to her character, and it's a good gag, but that's all it is. It's a gag. It takes time, and like Nissa and Turlough make it back early. and it's just that continuous. It's sort of like almost like this feels like the story's not gonna end. It feels like the end of the Return of the King, which when everyone complains about the end of the Return of the King, it's always because there's so many endings. This kind of feels like a little bit, but unlike the Return of the King, which deserved that ending, mainly because it was wrapping up a giant 3-film epic. The Lady of Mercia doesn't. Like, it really, really doesn't. Like, it's just kind of a shame. It feels really, really dragged on. Now, I've actually spent way too much time on this ending because I really shouldn't have. Because that's just a small quibble. Because the rest of the episode is actually great. I mean, what do you expect? It's written by Paul Magrs. He knows what he's doing. And you get the feeling that, yes, Magrs does realize what he's doing. He is telling a big story with big ideas and, big aspects that he's having fun with. He's having fun writing up rebellion and getting Tegan in place and sort of maneuvering this historical setting about so the Doctor and company can leave, and it is a lot of fun. Having Queen Ethelfred and Princess Elfwin as prominent characters here, both back in the past, is great because you actually get to see their dynamic a bit more. Like, you saw it a bit in part 1, but not as much. We get to see their dynamic here a bit more. And the Doctor eventually gets her into a nunnery, as Tegan was brought into a nunnery, because that's what the story was doing. It was creating this whole this whole idea of the characters being brought together into a sort of a conclusion, even if it's not the perfect conclusion. It's mostly just an okay conclusion. Again, the conclusion is wrapped up, and you have defeating of their uncle, which is really, really good. There's some nice political maneuverings. I wouldn't be surprised if this was influenced at all by Game of Thrones, because this was released in 2013, a couple of years after Game of Thrones started, and Game of Thrones was starting to get really, really strong and popular, which I think is actually okay, though it's a bit more of a humorous take on the subject matter and much less of a serious, dark and gritty thing that Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire does so well, because this, though it's never out and out comedy like with the previous Mars story that I covered, the Peterloo Massacre, that was out and out drama, whereas this one's dramatic comedy. There's comedic elements, but it never becomes farcical like Mars can do when he wants, because Mars can be really dramatic when he wants to be dramatic, and The Lady of Mercia is one of those more dramatic attempts at storytelling, which is important to note. The drama he writes is there, and it is important to have that drama be there and be there consistently and create something. Something that, honestly, the story does a really, really good job with. Like, it creates the whole, you get the whole, idea of here's what the situation is, here's who these characters are, here's what we're doing with this plot here. That's good, and it's something that I think Mars just works with. I will, it continues. It's overall, it continues the trilogy really, really well, because we're, this is the middle release, something different. So overall, I'm gonna have to give part 4 of The Lady of Mercia an 8 out of 10. That being said, we added the scores and averaged them out to give The Lady of Mercia a final score of 8.5 out of 10. concluding the story. So thank you everybody for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment down below your opinions of the story. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? What do you think? Is it good? Is it bad? Let's get a discussion going, and subscribe if you haven't already, and join me next time when we finish the penultimate Olderness trilogy in the Olderness arc with Prisoners of Fate.